Good morning and welcome to MEED's Middle East and North Africa Water and Wastewater 2023 webinar. My name is Jennifer Aguinaldo. I am MEED's Energy and Technology Editor. I will be walking you through some slides over the next 45 minutes regarding the trends, policies, project investments in the MENA region's water sector over the next 45 minutes. And the last 15 minutes, hopefully we will have a chance for interaction and for you to ask your questions. But before that, if any one of you has joined us for the first time or do not know MEED, MEED has been around since 1957, providing news, analysis, commentaries on the most important events happening in the Middle East region. MEED.com and MEED Business Review are our publishing platform, while MEED Projects is our business intelligence platform. We have a market solutions team and an events team, and very shortly we will be releasing a report on the Middle East and North Africa region's water and wastewater sector, which I think will be a valuable tool for most of you who are joining us from various countries around the globe, from Europe, Asia, Africa. Right. So, 16 of the world's 25 extremely stressed countries in the world are in the MENA region. These stress levels are expected to worsen as global warming, population growth, and industrial and economic expansions drive water demand. And this will widen the existing demand-supply gap. As such, water is a national security issue for most of these countries in the region. As an example, Egypt, which has a population of 100 million, has been in a long-standing dispute with Ethiopia due to the big dam that's being built in Ethiopia that might have an impact into the flow of the water downstream over the Nile River, where it relies largely in terms of its water supply. In Libya and Iraq and Lebanon, it's becoming common to see people protesting in the summer because of disruption in water and power supply. Closer home in the GCC, we see countries like Saudi Arabia expanding their water reservoir capacity from 1.5 days to about, they want to build it up to 7 days by 2030 to enable them to expand their capacity to respond to national emergencies. So national water strategies have been embedded along with, there's been a coordinated approach in most of these countries, in a growing number of countries, to have water security, food, and energy security as part of their long-term economic plans. These strategies are anchored on expanding demand and on expanding supply to meet demand, while at the same time meeting the sustainable development goals as well as decarbonization targets, while complying with ESG standards. Typically, these strategies would include increasing water desalination capacity and enhancing wastewater or water treatment, and increasing the adoption of treated sewage effluent. There's been a major investment in transmission and distribution networks across all these countries to reduce network losses as well as non-revenue water. There's also, of course, these initiatives basically aim to reduce groundwater withdrawal as well as reliance on surface water. As I mentioned earlier, there's a desire to increase storage capacity to be able to meet national emergencies. On the demand side, there are tariff reforms being undertaken in various jurisdictions in order to enable end users to be more conscious of their consumption. There's also measures to promote water efficient appliances, as well as, let's say, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, they've enacted district cooling regulations in those jurisdictions as well. And to help these, there's a conscious initiative or drive to apply information technology and operational technology, enhancing the use of technology to improve forecasting, to improve supply, as well as be able to be able to respond to the needs of the consumers. And eventually, if you minimize water losses and able to limit or minimize or reduce water consumption, then you're also able to improve or reduce the carbon footprint of this sector. Privatization and PPPs playing a bigger role over the in the past few years, or even if you go back a decade, and that's expected to be even stronger over the next decade. Right. How do these initiatives, how do these strategies translate into actual capital investment in infrastructure projects in the water sector? This slide basically shows us that a total of about 115 billion worth of contracts were awarded over the past 11 years in the Middle East and North Africa region. Close to 14 billion were awarded between January and December and September this year, which means with 3 months left, it is likely that 2023 will be a record year in terms of the value of contracts awarded. This is a breakdown of the 115 billion between the subsectors that we are covering in this presentation, in this analysis. So the largest share is accounted for by transmission and distribution projects, pipelines, and water treatment and desalination projects are almost the same, 27.5 billion and 27 billion respectively. So overall, this region, we're referring to 15 countries in the MENA region, have awarded an average of about $10.4 billion a year in terms of these projects. Saudi Arabia, of course, is the largest market. I think it accounts for about 41% of the total. In terms of the top contractors and clients, we have Saudi Arabia's Al Rashid Trading and Contracting taking the top with over 4 billion worth of contracts won over the past 11 years. Coming second is Metito, and third is China's SEPCO 3. In terms of clients, saline water conversion company in Saudi Arabia, SWEC, is by far the largest client in terms of value of contracts awarded during this 11-year period. Moving on, So moving on, so I've just presented data on the overall water sector, which is broken down into 5 subsectors. We will now talk about the desalination sector. The key themes, desalination, as you all know, addresses demand and supply gap for potable water, minimizes reliance on limited ground and surface water, but it also is a very energy-intensive process, especially with the MSF and MED technologies in the past. And major efforts are underway to be able to reduce the carbon footprint of this sector. At the same time, it produces brine, which is, of course, the waste product from the process. So key trends, bigger is better. Tawila in Abu Dhabi is to be completed this year, or has been completed, I think. It has a capacity of 909,000 cubic meters a day. So it is the second largest water desalination plant in the region, with Russell Care compared to Russell Care in Saudi Arabia, which of course uses both MSF and a small amount of RO. Hashan IWP is about to be awarded in Dubai. It has a capacity of 818 cubic meters a day. RO, reverse osmosis technology, is king. So the carbon emission reductions efforts have led to a decoupling of power and water production, particularly in the GCC states, where IWPP has been in the norm since the 1990s. So this has led to an increased adoption of reverse osmosis technology. And as we have seen with a couple of projects in Oman and Abu Dhabi, the dismantling and decommissioning of plants running on MSF and MED. Energy efficiency, so there are various levers being used to achieve this. Some projects, wrongly or rightly, are integrating renewable energy, solar PV farms as part in order to reduce the dependence of the plants from the grid. SWPC in Saudi Arabia has also reduced the specified power consumption for its plants from 3.5 to 3.2 kilowatt hour a cubic meter. As I mentioned earlier, privatization and PPPs are big and will grow even stronger. So it's previously it's been a very successful procurement model for IWTPs, and in 2018 we started seeing independent water projects, and now especially in Saudi Arabia this model is being used in sewage treatment and water pipeline and reservoir projects as well. Privatization, there are plans to privatize existing plants. Some of those transactions have been put on hold and contingent, I think, sometimes to the price of oil, but I think those are going to happen. I think the long-term objective entails privatizing most, if not all, assets in the region. Innovation, how do you make them more sustainable? How do you make them more energy efficient? So there's a big room for innovation. I know that some of you who are attending this webinar are technology providers. So from digital twins, from the moment a plant is constructed, to digitalizing the process or installing remote sensors to enable proactive maintenance of the plants. Those are going to be seen more increasingly in projects. Zero liquid discharge is, or ZLDs, being the next major technological development in the water business. I'll talk more about this a bit later on when we talk about INOWA, the project in NEOM, being executed by Itochu and Veolia. Desalination, in terms of planned and unawarded projects, there are about 20 billion worth of both EPC and IW projects that are on the pipeline of MEED. Saudi Arabia accounts for 41% or 8.3 billion of that total planned planned projects. In terms of clients, SWEC and SWPC, Saudi Water Partnership Company, will be the top clients. If you have seen the 2022-2028 planning statement of SWPC, it basically provides list of 50 projects from desalination down to water treatment and water transmission pipeline projects. The third largest client in terms of planned projects would be the utilities in Egypt. Egypt plans to build up to 100 desalination plants over the next 10 years. Moving on, Saudi Arabia, as the biggest market, of course, should be on the top priority of for business development planning. As I mentioned earlier, SWEC remains the world's largest producer of desalinated water. It has a capacity of 6.6 million cubic meters a day based on its latest annual statement. Although the assets are expected to be transferred to a subsidiary of the Public Investment Fund, Water Solutions Company. Based on the planning statement, SWPC plans to procure 3.5 million cubic meters of water of capacity, water desalination capacity. This is exclusive of the Ras Muhaisin IWP, which is currently under MEED. MEWA targets, the Ministry of Environment, Water, and Agriculture in Saudi Arabia targets the water desalination capacity of 11.35 million CMD by 2024, and in 2028 that will be about 15.82 million CMD. The aim by 2028 is to have a surplus of over 500,000 cubic meters a day. SWEC's current capacity, as I mentioned, 6.6 million CMD. Under construction projects, as far as we know, is about 1.4 million CMD, and under bid is about 650,000 CMD. SWPC completed IWP projects, I think, amount to a capacity of about 1 million CMD. Under construction is about 2.8. You have Jubail 3A, Jubail 3B, and Yanbu under construction, and under bid is about it's less than 1 million CMD. Moving on to the other countries in the region, DIWA has a target of increasing its existing water desalination capacity from 2.23 million CMD to 3.4 million CMD by by 2030. So that will be around 750 MIGD, if I'm correct. It has chosen Aqua Power to implement Hushan 1, its first independent water project, which has a capacity of 880 CMD. DIWA basically said it plans to produce 100% of desalinated water from mix of clean energy and waste heat by 2030. In terms of EWEC, the current capacity is about 4.8 million CMD. Under construction capacity of all SWRO projects, about 1.32 million CMD. In terms of demand, EWEC expects a slight decrease in demand due to the commissioning of the Quain Independent Water Project in the Northern Emirates, which means it will export less water to the Northern Emirates starting this year. But the demand will be back to 2029 to 3.6 million CMD. In terms of, as I said, Egypt has big ambitions, has big plans. It wants to reach a capacity of 3.5 million CMD by 2025 and reach 8.85 million by 2050. The tender for the first batch of independent water projects to be powered by renewable energy are due, if things go to plan, by end of the year. Jordan, the 2 billion Aqaba Amman water conveyance and desalination plant has been in the planning stage for several years. The tender closing dates for this project has been moved several times, but I think the bids are expected by the 5th of December. I think based on people I've been talking to, they expect 3 companies to submit a bid on that date. Morocco is also going big in terms of water desalination projects. Its national water plan entails allocating 11 billion of budget for expanding its water infrastructure. The Grand Casablanca IWP bids have been received and evaluated, and I think Acciona of Spain submitted the lowest bid for that project. And moving on, if some of you are interested in terms of tariffs, on the face value, on the face of it, the tariff submitted by Aqua Power for the Hushan 1 IWP Dubai is 0.365 per cubic meter. So historically, that is the lowest. But then there are other variables that come into play, like it has a longer, if you see a water project agreement of 30 years compared, let's say, with 25 years in Saudi Arabia for most of its projects. The largest so far is Tawila, and it's being completed. The next one will be Hushan, but of course the Saudi projects taken together will be the largest in terms of capacity. We don't have the tariffs for Oman because those have not been disclosed. So we can only measure, we can only discuss what we know. In terms of future projects, as we mentioned, we're looking at around 20 billion worth of projects that are in the procurement or planning stages. This slide shows the top water projects that are either in the main contract bid or are being evaluated and will likely be awarded over the next 6 to 12 months. The largest of that would be the Jordan project. It may extend beyond that time frame, of course, but it's very interesting to look at the NEOM water desalination plant project. It will be a zero liquid discharge project, very complex, huge capacity, worth $1 billion. And I think Itochu and Veolia, which is the developer team for this project, are in the process of assigning or appointing an engineering, procurement, and construction contractor for this project. Moving on to the wastewater sector, I think the developments in the wastewater sector has been underreported in the previous years. The projects have mostly been small, but that has been changing over the past few years. There are many issues in terms of treating wastewater in the region. There's scope for unifying and improving regulations in order to to enable the implementation of those regulations to increase the demand for treated sewage effluent reuse across the region. Certain countries have been reusing TSE, but the others are lagging behind. And treating wastewater is a very important component of most of these countries' sustainable development goals. So what's driving wastewater projects will be the need to decarbonize. Saudi Arabia and most of these other countries are rallying behind the circular carbon economy approach to energy transition, which means recycling and reusing water. There's a need to improve sanitation in many jurisdictions in this region where there's no efficient, modern wastewater collection networks. Urbanization is expected to increase, and there are new developments being built. If you see the giga projects in Saudi Arabia. And I'd like to give you some updates regarding some of the largest projects that have been awarded in the past couple of years. So the Al Hayman wastewater treatment project, 1.7 billion, probably the largest wastewater treatment on a PPP basis that has been awarded. It is in Kuwait. That picture is actually of Al Hayman. So depending on who's looking at it, some people are saying it's approaching commissioning some parts of it, but it is going ahead, and I think the completion date is by 2024. The main contractor for this project is Germany's main developer rather is WTE Wassertechnik in Germany. 25 years of wastewater treatment agreement, and 3-year operation and management for the canal, for the 450-kilometer wastewater and TSE pipelines. This year, the Al Wakra and Wukair sewage treatment project in Qatar was awarded the team of Metito, led by Metito. It's $1.2 billion. The capacity of the initial project is 150,000 CMD, but this can be expanded to 600 CMD in the future. It's being implemented on a build, operate, and transfer basis over a period of 25 years. In Saudi Arabia, the first and second batches of the independent sewage treatment projects have been awarded with a capacity of about 1 million cubic meters a day. The first project, Taif, is now operational. The other projects are still under construction. These projects, unlike the one in Kuwait and Qatar, they are being built on a build, own, and operate basis for 25 years. In Egypt, you will see a few slides later that Egypt will be a major it has been a major market, being one of the pioneers of wastewater treatment in the region. The El Hammam agricultural wastewater treatment plant is due to be completed next year. It's a $591 million project. Right. Again, if you look at the history of wastewater treatment plant contracts, you see that Saudi Arabia remains the largest market and the most important market. So these, it's not, if you've seen the 2022-2028 planning statement of SWPC, then you would know these figures by now. They expect the population to nearly double by 2030 to 15 million. And the current wastewater production in Saudi Arabia is 10.8 million CMD. And wastewater collection is about 9.8 million CMD. Oh, no, this is the target rather. Sorry, this is the target rather by 2030. Wastewater network coverage is about 62% in 2022, and they aim to increase this to 95% by 2030. TSE reuse is at 17% in 2015. I think they're aiming for for about 20% in 2020 and up to 70% by the end of this decade. By 2030, the plan is for Saudi Arabia to water production to be done through strategic partners, and I would translate this as through PPPs, through the private sector. We've got the list of projects being planned by SWPC. There's over a dozen projects here. Some of them, Al Higher is now bid evaluations underway for Al Higher ISTP, and the other batch 3 projects are yet to be tendered, but they are expected to be tendered soon, maybe before the end of the year or early next year. There's also a bunch of projects called small STPs. So I think there might be 100, if I'm correct, of small STPs in Saudi Arabia distributed across the major regions. They also plan to procure these projects on a PPP basis. So that's Saudi Arabia. In terms of wastewater plant and unawarded projects, there are about 21.3 billion worth of planned projects in the water treatment sector. So this would include wastewater and industrial waste, among others. Of these total, Saudi Arabia, again, is of course the largest market with 7.4 billion worth of projects that are in the pipeline. The UAE follows with 5.3 billion, and Egypt with 2.3 or $2.4 billion worth of projects being planned. In terms of top clients, who do we need to approach to in terms of future opportunities? National Water Company, of course, of Saudi Arabia is the largest, 2.6 billion in the pipeline. And Kuwait Oil Company, this one's more industrial waste water treatment, is the next second biggest client with 1.6 billion worth of projects in the pipeline, and Innova in Saudi Arabia planning a water recycling plant as well. In terms of unawarded projects, we've got the upgrade of sewage treatment plants by the National Water Companies, about 2.1 billion. This would be our estimate of the EPC value of this contract. So it's under bid. The next, so there's Project Wave in Abu Dhabi, which is a PPP project. It's a project by ADNOC and TAQA. The first package, which is in Mirfa, has been awarded to a team of Metito and Orascom, and I think they're in the process of reaching financial close for that project. The second part will be located in Al Nuf. So this is a massive seawater treatment plant, not wastewater, seawater treatment plant with a significant pipeline that would connect to the oil fields of ADNOC. There is a major water treatment plant being planned in Al Ula in Saudi Arabia, about $1 billion. I mentioned the Oxagon Village water recycling plant in Saudi Arabia as well. It's under pre-qualification. The Erbil sewage treatment plant, the first major sewage treatment plant project in the Kurdistan region, being backed by the Japanese, by JICA. It has been under evaluation. The bids have been received, and it's under evaluation, and we don't have a clear idea in terms of when it will be awarded, but we do know that the evaluation process is underway. There are a few other projects, even in Kuwait. The water desalination, in Egypt, you can see a few number of projects here in Egypt, including the expansion of stage 3 expansion of the Gabal Al Asfar wastewater treatment plant, the Helwan water treatment plant, and the Alexandra West Alexandria West Wastewater Treatment Plant. Um, we, of course, we've just mentioned the pipeline of projects in Saudi Arabia as well. There is a treated sewage effluent polishing plant being planned in Al Wasba in the UAE. We're not sure. I think the bids have been submitted a while back, and we're still in the process of obtaining the status of that project, of when it will be awarded. The client is ADSSC, which has been rebranded as SWS. We're heading to some of our last slides in terms of cooling, storage, and transmissions. If you go back to our first slide, there's about 4 billion worth of cooling projects, district cooling projects that were awarded in the 2013 and 2023 period. So about 4.7 billion were awarded historically. And in terms of the known projects that are in our database, we've got about 1.25 billion that are in the pipeline. The majority of those are in Saudi Arabia, followed by Qatar, UAE, and Egypt. In terms of storage, I've mentioned the case in Saudi Arabia where they want to increase their water storage capacity from, I think, 1.5 to 2 days, depending on the region, to about 7 days by 2030 to enable them to respond to any future emergencies that would require stable water supply. The awarded contracts across the Middle East and North Africa for dams, water tanks, a reservoir was about $13.1 billion, about $1 billion a year, basically during that period. And the planned and unawarded projects about $9.8 billion. Okay, so I forgot, in terms of cooling, in terms of countries, Saudi Arabia will of course be the largest country, followed by Qatar, Oman, and Tunisia. In terms of water transmission projects or pipeline projects, which both carrying both potable and wastewater, the value of contracts awarded between 2013 and 2023 amount to about $43 billion, and we have about $25.5 billion in the pipeline. UAE has the upper hand, mainly because it has major projects. I think there's a 20 billion deep sewage tunnel being planned in Dubai, followed by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Egypt. I think we're heading to our summary. I think we're ahead of time. We will be taking on questions in a moment, but let me go through a quick summary of what we've just discussed. In terms of future projects pipeline or future opportunities in the MENA water and wastewater sector, our internal database shows some 7 billion worth of projects that are in the pre-execution phase. About 29 billion of these projects are in advanced procurement stage, meaning they are in bid, under bid, or bid evaluation. As in the past 13 years and the past 11 years, the largest market will be transmission and distribution. Again, this is in line with improving or even putting in place where there aren't any wastewater or potable water collection, and to minimize water losses and improve sanitation. There will be comparable amount of projects. There are comparable amount of projects that are in the pipeline in terms of water treatment plants and water desalination plants. About $9.8 billion for storage, and as I mentioned, about 1.2 billion in terms of pooling projects. This is our final slide before we take on your questions. I think there's quite a bit of questions here. So water insecurity offers substantial business investment opportunities. If you look at the 77 billion planned projects in this region, that is mainly capital investment on physical infrastructure projects. So, of course, it was the MEP and the technologies used in operating those plants, and opportunities to innovate, as I said, where it's zero liquid discharge or enabling the water treatment plants and desalination plants to use less energy. That would be an area of growth over the next, over the foreseeable future. Saudi Arabia remains the largest market, followed by the UAE, other GCC states, Egypt, Iraq, and Morocco. Long-term economic and water agenda and their implementation are crucial to future investments. The main issue is how to make water scarcity solutions, like water desalination and TSE treatment, contribute less to the problem of high carbon emissions in this country, in these countries, in this region. There's a strong demand management measures. Well, I suppose the implementation's variable between countries, but these includes tariff reforms to enable consumers to be more conscious of their usage and carbon footprint. Regulations for TSE and district cooling may need to be in place. Bigger role for the private sector. You can see the pipeline in Saudi Arabia in terms of their independent water infrastructure projects, and countries like Morocco, Egypt, and the UAE are following, are doing the same. Levelized water cost has scope to rise or fall, subject to multiple variables, so that the credit rating of the client, of the sovereign, the length of the water purchase agreement, the EPC cost, and the electricity cost, of course, which is an important part of the overall tariff for water. And with that, I'll take some questions now. I'll just take a short break. What is your insight on developing MENA's hydrogen value chain regarding water security? Of course, yeah, I've missed to mention that. That's one of the drivers for water demand in the region. So there's about 186 billion worth of green hydrogen projects that are in the pipeline, mainly in Egypt, Oman, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Morocco. So yes, that will drive a demand for water, desalinated treated water higher, simply because you need purified water to be able to, as an input for electrolysis that will produce hydrogen and oxygen. I think there's some innovations. I'm seeing some innovations where you can treat maybe seawater or untreated water, but I think that's not yet ready to scale. So as of now, yes, it will drive the demand for green hydrogen projects, will drive the demand for water. Developing a value chain for, there's been projects in the region in Abu Dhabi that aims to assemble, let's say, electrolysis devices in the region. So those are, I think, in early stages of negotiations or planning in terms of investors. Next question. How will the massively increased salt content in the Gulf and Red Sea be managed, resulting from increased desalination? That's a very great question. I think it's bigger than me. But I think, as you may be aware, the planned water desalination plant in NEOM aims to have zero liquid discharge. So they will be monetizing and processing the brine before, and to make sure that all the minerals are collected and there's minimum brine or zero brine that will be discharged into the seawater. So those are early steps, I guess, in terms of addressing the harmful effects of brine in terms of the salinity of water in the Red Sea. And I would assume there are initiatives in the Red Sea to address that. Right. Right. Before I take on the next question, I think we are running a poll. There will be you will be asked to provide some answers to a series of questions that we will be flashing on the screen. The first question is, would you like us to contact? I think I don't have to go through that. I think I'll take the next question. Um, can you talk more about ZLD? Would like to know about ZLT after the desalination project. Um, right. There's some level of pessimism in terms of the in terms of the economic feasibility of zero liquid discharge plants. But as I mentioned earlier, the trailblazing project in NEOM will show us that this can be achieved, that you can build it in scale, and that it can be done. So of course it has not yet started construction. In terms of the technical aspects of ZLD, zero liquid discharge, I think there will be more people in the audience who will be more qualified to answer that question, but I will try to check and find out and get back to you in terms of these questions. Saudi has a large pipeline of EPC, BOT projects to be tendered out by NW. Yeah, that's correct. How likely will all these projects be tendered, and what's the risk they cancel or roll back the plans? That's an excellent question. Bear in mind also that yeah, so bear in mind that of that 9.5 or so billion worth of projects that are in the pipeline, we cannot underestimate the capacity of these companies to come up with new tenders. If you will look at the SWEC website, there's a rush of new tenders in terms of in the past few months. So will they cancel or roll back the plans? I think it depends. I think it's a hard question to answer because the past 12 months saw a slower pace in terms of contract awards by the SWPC on one hand, while there has been an increase in terms of the frequency of tenders by SWEC and through WIPCO and WTC. I know that for many of you who have been in the region for a long time, we know that they come up with this regular forecast. Not all of them come through, but given the political will, given their target to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and their Paris Agreement commitments, their national distributed contributions to the Paris Agreement, I think that there will be a strong initiative to push most of these projects ahead, mainly because they are energy intensive. They need to dismantle some of the old plants that are highly polluting. So my take is that most of these projects, I cannot say if it's the majority, but most of these projects are gonna push through. Will they shift from IWP to EPC, or will there be a joint EPC and IWP in the future? I think that they will pursue both contracting models, so it will remain a vibrant market and source of opportunities for contractors and developers over the long term. Okay, another question from the same attendee. I've heard that generally there are only 2 to 3 companies that finally submit for projects, including the Rais Rabig IWTP and LTOM tenders of NWC. Why is the competitive landscape so concentrated? which local company is best placed and preferred as a partner for an international player trying to break into the market. I think I've got the slide. I think it's the fifth or sixth slide in this presentation that shows you the top EPC contractors in the region. I would not be in a position to say which of them would be the best potential partner, but for sure, especially for Saudi Arabia, they always talk about having a robust ecosystem. They do have local contractors available to bid with in terms of these projects. Who are the bidders or qualified bidders for the NEOM desalination plant? The answer is I don't know, but we will try to find out. We will keep trying to find out. I'm not sure if they have tendered the EPC contract. From my understanding, from what I know, from what the market tells me, there will be an EPC tender. Who are qualified to bid, I don't have access to that list, but if we have it, you will have it. Through if you are a subscriber, of course, of MEED.com or MEED projects. Which authorities are involved in the improvement of regulations in relation to wastewater? That's a simple question, and there are many. It really depends. If you look at Egypt, I think there are multiple companies, authorities that are involved in terms of developing or drafting wastewater regulations. In the GCC countries, you would probably have one or two that are involved, but then there are many layers. If you look at Saudi Arabia, there's MEWA, which is the ministry level, and we also don't know if the planned transfer of assets from SWCC to a PIF subsidiary, if that will, from what I understand, from what the market tells me, SWEC will evolve and focus in research and development. How soon those assets transfer will take place in view of the privatization plans in place, I don't really know. But the answer to this question is it really depends on which country. So as I mentioned, countries like Egypt will have multiple stakeholders, regulatory authorities that are involved in those. But ultimately, in terms of specific wastewater regulations, I would expect there would be one organization that is responsible for that. Any details about Oman? Right, is it water desalination or wastewater? Oman, of course, is a pioneer in terms of independent water projects. They awarded their first IWTP way ahead of the other GCC countries. And right now there are two projects, one under construction. Is it Barca or Kubra? One of those projects under construction. Another one is expected to reach financial close. They are smaller in capacity compared to what we find in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but they do have robust plans in Oman to drive their desalination wastewater capacity. If you can specify which sector in Oman you want to know more about, then that would really help me frame the answer as well. Moving on to the next question. Can you tell what is zero liquid discharge as the word? Okay, so the plan in NEOM, as far as I know, is to build an advanced reverse osmosis plant. And along with this, there will be another plant that will process the brine into products where they can mine other products like magnesium, among others, that can be a feedstock to a whole new industry in Oxagon, probably a 20 billion complex that would those minerals will serve as a feedstock. That's as much as we know. I think Veolia and Itochu are in this webinar. So they will be best placed in terms of answering those questions. I think they will soon tender or appoint an EPC contractor for those projects. I say projects because as far as I know, I could be wrong, of course, there will be an RO plant and a brine processing plant as part of the plan. Yes, there's a strong interest in Oman, and we will see if we can provide this to you in terms of the unawarded projects and project under evaluation in Oman. We will see if we can provide that. Have you heard of any projects to deal with produced water recycling to reuse? I am not produced water recycling to reuse. Okay. Um, I am not sure I have an answer to this question, but I will get back to you. And if you can also send me my email address would be, hold on, my email address is here. If you can drop me a mail, then that would be really great. The level of water project development in Qatar and Oman, particularly in desalination, appears to be notably limited. Is this due to saturation in the market or budget constraints? Um, okay, so I'll take Qatar first. So they've just awarded the Wakra and Wukair sewage treatment plant. It's a massive project, 1.2 billion dollars, and there's the current plan involves expanding that to 500,000 CMD. The facility independent water and power projects. I think the pre-qualification is underway. I think the tender has been issued rather with bids expected in December. So that will have a water desalination component, and that I have not heard. You're right. I have not heard of an independent water project plan as of now, and it remains to be seen if they plan to do that in the future. For Oman, desalination, as I've said, I've mentioned Kubra and Barka. They've been awarded, and there are two other independent water projects that are planned in Oman, as far as I know. Is it a question for Qatar? I'm not sure if it's a question of budget or a question of demand, given the size of the country. For Oman, I could be wrong. Are there budget constraints? Obviously there are, but I can't really give. I think it's best to ask consultants or the clients in terms of the deal. But that's, as far as my opinion is concerned, could be due to demand in Qatar, the size of the country, and in Oman, maybe a combination of both. And of course, usually the clients would start tendering new projects once they've delivered, once the private partners have delivered the ones that have been awarded, usually. Which also maybe somehow explains the slower pace of project awards by SWPC, because there are 4 water desalination plants that are still under construction. The level of water project, sorry. Okay, I'll take on the next question. What are the markets for small units in wastewater treatment based on MPR? Interesting question. We don't have that answer. Unfortunately, we cover projects mostly in the $30 million band upwards for our internal database of projects. I don't have an answer for this question, unfortunately, but I will look into it. 2 questions from one attendee. Do we have visibility over the percentage of those projects being under PPPs versus traditional EPC contracts? I don't have that. We can, if you are a MEED project subscriber, then there's a tool in which you can easily determine the split of the market between EPCs and PPP projects. But as I mentioned, the plan for Saudi Arabia for its wastewater treatment plant capacity would be 100% by 2030 done through partnerships. So I suppose that would be PPPs. But as for the active projects, I think I will venture to say that the majority, um, um, overall, if you look at the 15 countries in the Middle East and North Africa region, the majority would still be EPCs, but that's starting to change with more stakeholders, government stakeholders, recognizing the value of PPPs. How do you introduce innovative technologies to Saudi Arabia? Interesting question. There's as we mentioned, the plan is perhaps for SWEC to focus on research and development in the future if the plan to transfer assets to PIF is correct. So I think that's a good way to start. Outside SWEC, there's NEOM, which is of course doing everything to make it as sustainable as possible to be a net zero giga project. So I think it will be a test bed for new technologies. And of course, they also have the budget being PIF owned in terms of implementing new technologies. How do you see brownfield projects in water generation in GCC? Brownfield projects in water generation, I think if we're talking about water desalination plants, that's a hard question to answer, but my reading is that most of the water desalination plants that are using the energy intensive MSF or MED technologies are going to be dismantled. Even SWPC and SWEC plants, all of its plants will be reverse osmosis based in the future, except for the two giant water desalination plants that are still relatively new and therefore use more efficient, energy efficient technologies. Do you have more details? We can do that. Are you a consultancy of water infrastructure systems? We are not. We have a consulting arm, and you can reach out to us if you have a specific requirement for consulting or structured project. We've got 2 minutes left. Do you have information on water desalination based on solar power? So we've just, Red Sea has just awarded the 2 billion Amala multi-utilities project. The water desalination plants there will be powered 100% by renewable, by solar energy. And Egypt, on the other hand, plans all these desalination plants that it plans to build over the next 20 years to be powered by renewable energy as well. Okay, well, I think I'd like to take more questions, but I think that's all we have time for. It's been a great pleasure for you joining us. For those of you who we weren't whose questions I was not able to answer, we will endeavor to provide answers by email, and you can see my email on the screen. And I think that's it. Thank you so much. It was a delightful experience to be able to share these insights and data with you. Do reach out to us if you have any requirement. I see some of you wanting more information and asking if you do consulting or research. And of course, there's this premium intelligence report, MENA Water and Wastewater 2023. It's a comprehensive report that presents a profile of each of these countries in terms of their existing water infrastructure, the regulations, policies, as well as the pipeline of projects for each country, including who are bidding for what projects across those 5 subsectors in the price. So it will be a handy business development tool for those of you looking to understand better the MENA water and wastewater sector. And with that, I want to thank you all. Thank you, and we'll see you again in another webinar.